impression compounds. So they are rigid, thermoplastic, and used with compressive techniques. So impression compound are also called your modeling plastics. It is a thermoplastic material and is supplied in the form of sheets, sticks. So basically this is your composition: waxes, thermoplastic resins, fillers, plasticizers, and coloring agents. So it is basically of two types. Type 1 is your lower fusing material used for making your impressions in the oral cavity. It may be supplied either in sheet or stick form. Your type 2 is the higher fusing material, which is also called as your tray compound and is used for forming trays to be used in the oral cavity. So this is another classification based on the mode of supply. It can be brown, green, gray, white, and black. So brown is basically higher working temperature for extending the short borders of the custom trays. Green is the lowest working temperature, most popular, easy flowing, good handling properties. Gray is average working temperature, longer period of flow. Then for your white and black, this is your working temperatures. And your high fusing material is mainly used in your cake forms. Then coming to your fusion temperature, it is 43.5 degrees Celsius. So the practical significance is it indicates definitive reduction in plasticity of the material during cooling. And above this temperature, if it is softened, the material remains plastic. Once the impression tray is heated, it should be firmly held in position until the impression cools below this fusing temperature. And then only it should be removed from the patient's mouth. Then coming to thermal conductivity, it has a low thermal conductivity. Then your linear contraction on cooling from the mouth to room is very low, 0.3 to 0.4%. Then your glass transition temperature, 39 degrees Celsius. So non-crystalline solids, there is no definitive melting temperature. Gradually it softens as the temperature is raised. The temperature at which there is no abrupt increase in thermal expansion coefficient indicates increased mobility, and this is your glass transition temperature, which is characterized by a glassy structure. So below this temperature, it loses its fluid characteristics and has significant resistance to shear deformation. So dimensional stability is ensured by carefully preparing and handling the material, avoiding over and prolonged heating, adequate flow to allow close adaptation to the tissues, and minimum of the internal stress in the impression. The tray, copper band, or other containers used to convey the compound to the mouth must be strong and rigid and stable. Impression should be withdrawn from the mouth only after they are hardened throughout. Cast or die, whatever, should be made as soon as possible to avoid inaccuracies caused by the release of stress. So you should pour them also early. There is no rush in pouring them, but also you should not leave them because maybe there would be some dimensional inaccuracies. So hence pour them. Causes of internal stresses would be your high coefficient of thermal expansion, poor thermal conductivity, relatively large temperature, drop from the softening to the room temperature. So for the manipulation, it is to be put in a thermostatically controlled water bath between 55 to 60 degrees Celsius. Or you can do it yourself also. Please do not put it in boiling water. We always do this mistake. This leaches out the impression material and also it disturbs its properties. The flow is increased and your impression would never be that good if you do this. So always ensure that the water is between 55 to 60 degrees. Always break your compound into pieces and small pieces and then put it into water. It must be immersed in the water for a sufficient time to ensure the complete softening. However, it should also not be left too long in the warm water. Then if we need it wet or inside the water bowl or whatever, the water is also incorporated into it and this acts as a plasticizer. We need to knead it for about 1 to 3 minutes. Then they say construction of the cast, you must pour it within 1 hour, that is best. Then for the disinfection, first we need to just rinse it with water, and then we can immerse it for 10 to 30 minutes in glutaraldehyde, right? Advantage is that it is rigid when it's set, it is inexpensive, it is non-toxic, it does not require any machines, any systems, and it is very easy to use. So disadvantages: due to the pressure while making impressions, tissues would be compressed. So they also distort easily, leading to poor dimensional stability. It cannot be removed from the undercuts. There is high thermal expansion. It does not reproduce fine surface details. Now coming to your zinc oxide eugenol impression paste. So basically there are two tubes like we see here, your base paste and your catalyst paste. So your base paste would contain zinc oxide and your vegetable or mineral oil that would act as your plasticizer. Then your second is your catalyst paste tube that contains eugenol or oil of clove, gum or polymerized resin, fillers, resin's balsam, accelerator moisture. Then depending upon the hardness, it is classified into type 1 or hard set and type 2 or soft set. And depending upon the eugenol content, it can be eugenol containing impression paste or it can be non-eugenol containing impression paste. So the setting is acid-base reaction that forms a chelate. The product is your zinc eugenolate. So the zinc atom held by two eugenol claws due to the ionic salt bonds formed between the zinc and the phenolic oxygen of each molecule of eugenol. Autocatalytic reaction: water is needed to initiate the reaction and is also the byproduct of this reaction. This is what happens basically. Also here, while we are mixing, what we can do is we can add your Vaseline, cocoa butter, etc. also while we are spatulating this mix. So for the setting time, the initial setting time, the period from the beginning of mixing until the material ceases to pull away or string out when its surface is touched with the metal rod of the specified dimensions. Impression should be seated in the mouth before the initial set. Then final setting time, the rod fails to penetrate the surface of the specimen more than 0.2 mm under the load of 50 grams. So this is basically a general thing I have told you, like how we have to see the initial and final setting time, what it means. So basically for this, type 1 initial setting time is 3 to 6 minutes, type 2 also it's the same. The final setting time for type 1 is 10 minutes and this, for type 2 is 15 minutes. So how to control the setting time? For decreasing the setting time, addition of zinc acetate or other accelerators can be done. Small drops of water can be also put in while we are mixing to increase. We can cool the spatula or the mixing slab. We can add oils and waxes like I have told you. We can add your petroleum jelly, Vaseline, cocoa butter, etc. This helps. Then coming to your consistency and flow, it should be homogeneous and flow uniformly against the tissues while the impression is being obtained. It should have thick consistency to compress the tissues. If thin consistency, impression of the tissues in a relaxed condition with little or no compression can be achieved. Materials with decreased flow at various time intervals have shorter setting times and a shorter time interval between initial and final set. Dimensional stability, it shrinks 0.1% or less at the end of 30 minutes. Basically, where we use it in a CD patient is for your secondary impressions. After your border molding, after your primary impression, you construct a custom tray, you use the green stick compound and you do the border molding, and then you take a final impression with zinc oxide eugenol paste basically. And then you pour your master cast. So this is what it is used for basically, UG. So manipulation is, mixing is done on oil impervious paper. Papers are provided to you. Your butter paper kind of things are provided in the box itself, or you can also do it on a glass mixing slab with a stainless steel spatula. Proper proportion is to be obtained by squeezing equal ropes of equal length from each of the tubes, and then both of them need to be mixed well. The mixing time is about 1 minute until a uniform color and consistency is achieved. Then the mix is spread like a thin layer over the tissue bearing surface of your custom tray, and also your borders. Remember to cover your borders as well, and then it is placed inside the mouth and held firmly in position in the patient's mouth. Also, I would say before you place it into the patient's mouth, make sure that you have dried the patient's mouth well. Then coming to your non-eugenol impression paste. So the disadvantage with zinc oxide eugenol paste is that it has a stinging or burning sensation, and your free eugenol present may leach out, causing disagreeable taste. And in some patients, chronic gastric disturbances may also be resulted in case you have used zinc oxide eugenol as your surgical packs. So like I told you, it is used for your final impressions in prosto, but also zinc oxide eugenol can be used as a surgical pack dressing. So there it can cause chronic gastric disturbances as well. So in such cases, we prefer to use the non-eugenol impression phase. So this is the reaction which happens with your non-eugenol impression phase. So it is almost similar to your ZOE. There is saponification reaction produced an insoluble soap. Zinc oxide reacted with the carboxylic acid and orthobenzoic acid. Your disadvantage here is your disagreeable odor and taste. So advantage is that it is relatively rigid material, thus impression can be removed from the mouth without any deformation. It allows sufficient working time to register surface details very accurately. It is dimensionally stable. Minor defects can be corrected locally by adding a fresh mix like we do the patchwork. It should not be done, but the advantage is that it can be easily corrected. We can mix it up freshly and then apply it over to the area which has not come or is deformed, and then we can seat it again into the patient's mouth and a little pressure can be applied so it can be corrected. Disadvantages: it requires special trays, it is sticky in nature, adapts to the tissues, cleaning is difficult, it will stick to the patient's mouth, it will stick to the beard, mustache, etc. Also, you need to be very careful. It is better you apply a thin coat of Vaseline around the patient's mouth and then seat it. Otherwise, it's not good. There is presence of eugenol can cause tissue irritation, etc. It cannot be used for making impressions of teeth and undercut areas as it is inelastic in nature. Then coming to the last thing, your impression plaster. So the composition is similar to your dental plaster. It is calcium beta calcium sulfate hemihydrate. When mixed with water, it forms calcium sulfate dihydrate. So potassium sulfate is acting as an accelerator. It is added. Then borax is there as a retarder. Pigments such as alizarin red makes a clear distinction between the impression and the model. So this needs to be added here. Then sometimes additives are supplied as aqueous solution, which is to be mixed with plaster. So these are your percents of what it is added in. Potassium sulfate is 4%, borax is 0.4 to 1%, alizarin red is 0.04%. Then potato starch is also incorporated so that the set plaster will disintegrate due to the swelling of starch and make it soluble. After the cast has hardened, the impression and the cast are immersed in hot water, thus facilitating rapid removal of the impression from the cast module. So your added advantage of starch is it produces very smooth mixture. It produces slightly sticky mix that adheres to the tray, and even when in thin wafers, it adheres. It serves as an inert filler and reduces the temperature rise. Then water powder ratio, the higher the ratio, lower the setting time, lower the expansion, saturation time, longer the mixing, lesser the setting time, and greater the expansion temperature. Increased temperature, faster is the setting, hence it will set more quickly in the mouth than in the bowl. Main difference between your impression plaster and your model plaster is that there would be more rapid setting in impression plaster. Smaller setting expansion for greater accuracy is there in impression plaster. Much lower strength so that fracture can occur easily if material engages in undercuts. So this is your basic differences. Then accuracy. Accurate impression is due to the initial fluidity of the material, allowing to record the soft tissues in the uncompressed state. So it is basically used in your mucostatic impression techniques. So there is minimal dimensional change on setting. Then manipulation, water powder ratio is 0.06, that is 100 grams of powder in 60 ml of water. It is mixed in a rubber bowl using wide stiff braided spatula, and mixing time is about 30 to 45 seconds. Then in a custom tray with 1 to 1.5 mm ratio, it is put in. Wash plaster impression is the preliminary. Compound impression can also be done, like after we use the impression compound, that itself can be, a layer of your plaster can be added, that we call as wash plaster impressions. That can be done. Recording of the impression of the undercut area and the fractured pieces, which is then secured in correct position by sticky wax or cyanoacrylate glue. So then construction of cast, mix of the model plaster or dental stone is poured directly into the plaster impression. Water and dissolved hemihydrate will penetrate into the porous plaster of the impression. The set cast will tightly be bonded to the impression. So separating media helps us take out the impression in the cast. So varnishes can be used, soap solutions, etc. Now, advantages are it is dimensionally accurate with good surface details, absorbs palatal secretions during setting, it has speedy handling and easy manipulation, reduces minimum tissue displacement. And your disadvantages would be it cannot be used to compress the tissues. In very wet mouth, surface of plaster tends to be washed away, spoiling the surface details. It is exothermic setting reaction. Separating media used may obliterate some details. It cannot be removed from the undercuts without breaking. So these are the main references. The articles I have already quoted inside the PPT, and then most of it is from Philips. A few classifications were not in Philips and have been taken from Mahalakshmi. So thank you. This is it. And for further queries, you may contact me on Instagram. My ID is with the name Dr.Yogeshwari. You can search me there and DM me any queries. I would be really happy to answer them for you. So thank you, and do study this topic from your Philips. It's a very important topic from an exam point of view. So that's it. Take care. Bye-bye.